Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. InsyaAllah, today we will present about theory of COVID-19 and impact of economy. Along with me, my fellow friends, MASYITAH binti RAMLI 117 to 116, Muhammad Syafiq bin SALAM 117 to 124, NORHASYIMAH binti FAUZI 117 to 138, SITI KHADIJAH binti HASSAN 117 to 140, Siti NURLYANA binti Muhammad YUSOF 117 to 142. Next, the introduction. The COVID-19 pandemic is a virus that can cause various diseases from flu to more serious illness. The United Nations World Health Organization has issued a statement that the COVID-19 pandemic is also known as the coronavirus pandemic caused by respiratory syndrome. The outbreak was detected in 2018 in Wuhan city, Hubei, China. There is no denying that the current COVID-19 or coronavirus outbreak has had a major economic impact on the entire country due to the increasing rate of infection nationwide. Malaysia has implemented a lockdown policy. Next, the limitations of this movement are across all sectors of the economy, both in the public and private sectors. The outbreak of the COVID-19 epidemic has resulted in many Malaysians losing their jobs and being unemployed during this period. Finally, the impact of COVID-19 has caused various important sectors of the country to go bankrupt, which has caused the country's economy to collapse, causing Malaysians to lose their jobs and become unemployed for a relatively long period of time.
Okay, now we go to the background of COVID-19 in Malaysia. Coronavirus disease 2019 is defined as illness caused by a novel coronavirus now called severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, which was first identified amid an outbreak of respiratory illness cases in Wuhan, China. It was initially reported to the WHO on 31 December 2018. 30 January 2020, the WHO declared the COVID-19 outbreak a global health emergency. On 11 March 2020, WHO declared COVID-19 a global pandemic, its first such designation since declaring H1N1 influenza pandemic in 2009. The virus was reported to have spread in Malaysia at the end of January 2020, when following the COVID-19 pandemic in China, tourists from China who arrived in Johor via Singapore were tested positive for the virus on 25 January 2020. The first case of COVID-19 was identified in Malaysia on 25 January 2020 and found in 3 Chinese nationals in Singapore who had previously had close relation with affected individuals. Okay, next. The emergence of local cluster began in March 2020. The largest cluster at that time was aligned with the religious event of the Tabligh congregation held in late February and early March in Sri Petaling, KL, contributing to a significant increase in local cases as well as exporting cases to the neighbouring countries. In recent weeks, Malaysia has reported the largest cumulative number of confirmed infection of COVID-19 in Southeast Asia. The number of positive cases increased to 553 cases on 16 March 2020 and Prime Minister declared the MCO. Social distance must be enforced for 14 days from 18 March to 31 March 2020 in order to reduce the rapid spread of COVID-19. Since 18 March, the government has prevented people from moving to other states or areas affected by COVID-19. Two deaths related to COVID-19 were confirmed in Malaysia on 17 March 2020 by a 16-year-old man from Kuching, Sarawak with a history of chronic disease and a 34-year-old man from JB, Johor, who took a part in religious event in Seri Petaling, KL. In addition, the WHO predict that the number of cases of COVID-19 in Malaysia will increase rapidly and peak in mid-April, thus extending the MCO for another 14 days until 28 April 2020. The MOHD announced 69 positive cases of COVID-19 on 17 April. This is the first time since 14 March 2020 the number of cases has been less than 100. There was sudden rise in cases in September and October 2020 following the outbreak in Sabah and worsening infection control due to the government delay in implementing appropriate sanctions immediately before the third wave of previous wave erupted. As of 23 December 2020, there are total of 98,737 confirmed cases in Malaysia with a total 8,014 cases fully recovered and 444 deaths and 18,279 cases still active.
Next, the theory of outbreak of COVID-19. Next. The first, the theory from Islamic perspective. Theory from Islamic perspective. The outbreak of COVID-19 disease in Islamic historical record is still being debated and controversies both among scholars, kiai and ustad, even in the social media and tend to be interconnected with each other. Some of Islamic scholars say that COVID-19 disease is very similar to the case of outbreak attacking Muslims in the past. For example, the history of Islam, we can see about the epidemic of disease that occurred at the time of the Muslims conquered Iraq and Syria. After that, came an outbreak of cholera that consumed about 25,000 people at that time. Therefore, it is not surprising that the scholar, kiai and ustad and others associate with this event with the outbreak of COVID-19 disease because this outbreak at the first glance is very similar to the outbreak of COVID-19 which occurred today that consumed 10,000 of souls. Next. Second, theory from Health Organization. According to World Health Organization 2020, the outbreak of COVID-19 has proven to be unparalleled disaster, especially in the country most of affected, including China, Italy, Iran, and the United States. This outbreak will affect in terms of health, social, and economic aspect. Any realistic scenario is too early to be predicted, but it will have a strong global impact if a catastrophic outlook appears to be faced by high-income countries, especially those who are already affected by the outbreak. In the worst-case scenario, in particular, when COVID-19 outbreak occurs, most countries will be unprepared, with little resources allocated to provide for a viral emergency. WHO also predict that COVID-19 will not impact Africa or South America. Next. Second, third theory from Indonesian YouTuber. Ewing HD described that the thermos scan gun, which is a tool that check the human before enter the premise. He said that the thermos scan gun has infrared rays, and these rays are very dangerous and will affect the brain. This tool also said to have a bad effect on the eye if indirectly exposed to the eye. Second, corona vaccine. He said some of top officials who have anticipated the arrival of the corona and have already made the vaccine to sell at the high price to make a profit. he said the community is desperate to treat corona, so they will buy it even at high price. Some even say that Bill Gates has assumed that COVID-19 will occur, so he has already prepared the vaccine. There is also a theory that said the vaccine is used to plant a microchip chip in the human body that can control human. Next. MHD also said that major technology of 5G is to spread the coronavirus because the virus is not visible to the naked eye. The spread of this virus through transmitters such as radio. People with other disease will be exposed to the coronavirus through 5G transmitters and have more risk of dying. Some even say that 5G technology have microtones that control human remotely. Okay, and lastly, Daddy Corbuzier and his life guest said that corona is a scam and spread on social media so that all people will believe in the danger of this disease. The corona came from the flu, which is modified in the laboratory to be more aggressive and dangerous to anyone infected. He also said that the death rate due to the other disease is higher than death due to corona. He also added not many of the people infected with corona die simply because of the corona. According to them, the purpose of corona is to spread fear to the ignorant society and to subdue the society to the leaders. That's all for me.
Okay, next, the economic impact due to COVID-19. Okay, next. Okay, first, the Visit Malaysia 2020 campaign has been cancelled. The tourists that visit Malaysia every year estimate as much 27 million. The Visit Malaysia 2020 campaign was projected by the government for 30 million visitors and sales of up to RM100 billion. However, with the COVID-19 crisis and a projected 10.6% target for China tourists, the number of visitors and revenues will be drastically reduced. So consequently, tourism receipt for Chinese tourists declined by 39% and visitors from other countries by 17%. Okay, second point, inhibits the income earned by small traders. The small business sector is one of the sectors most directly affected due to movement control orders resulted from COVID-19. This is because it is estimated that their group is 98.5% of the total enterprise. Due to the closure of the support sector such as retail and transportation, the small traders unable to operate and at the same time lead to lose their source of income. Okay, the third point. Next, many workers are unemployed. Okay, it is include tourism, aviation, business, creative industry, housing, human resources, private medicine and others. Unemployment concerns increased to 40% at the current high COVID-19 compared to the previous year. As a result, many employees have been instructed to take unpaid leave for several months, with pay cuts between 20 to 50%. This also caused the workforce to experience the problem of retrenchment and as a result, the unemployment rate increases. Okay.
Okay, the last objective for our assignment is the solution of pandemic COVID-19 on economy. Since the pandemic was declared when epidemic spread across borders to the rest of the world and involved large numbers of population rapidly. Therefore, we need to find a solution to keep ourselves from being infected with this disease. Okay, the first solution is the field of tourism. Since the government has closed the doors to match the country, tourists from abroad cannot enter to Malaysia. Therefore, President of the Association of Malaysian Travel Agents, Tan Kok Liang said, the best step is to stop the campaign Visit Malaysia 2020 because this epidemic has adversely affected the tourism industry in Malaysia and around the world. Yap Sok Ling, the Managing Director of Asian Overland Service Tours and Travel, believes that the funds set aside for Visit Malaysia 2020 will be used better when the virus recover. Okay, the second effort that government should do is society's economy. Government needs to help the people that are affected by the COVID-19 epidemic. For example, the Malaysian government has agreed to provide financial assistance. Society will receive and they can apply for the various assistance and initiative outlined in the economic stimulus package that was announced by the Prime Minister. Okay, apart from that, they will get 20 billion economic stimulus package that has been announced. The society also can enjoy the various assistance under the People's Concern Economic Stimulus Package. There is Prihatin that announced by the Prime Minister in March 2020. Okay, the last effort that can made by government is, since the epidemic also caused many workers was fired and some of them need to work from home, so the government should allow employees to continue working while maintaining the standard operating procedure SOP that has been set. This is to prevent many workers from fired. Most of the hygiene procedures that need to be practiced in the office are to ensure that the cleanliness space are in a good condition. This can be done through cleaning work by using disinfectant soap with dilution of alcohol concentration of at least 70% and water. Okay, each mixture should be used only once and also ensure that the household-based use has not expired. Employers also need to make it as a mandatory to check body temperature before they go to work and include the contract works every time they enter the workplace. Okay, that's all from me.
After that, the conclusion. COVID-19 pandemic is very dangerous to the community, especially in Malaysia, with the positive case of COVID-19 being recorded day by day. This disease is a global disease that is not only suffering in Malaysia, but also foreign countries face the same thing. As a result of this COVID-19, the global economy is declining and it's a very worrying impact. In Malaysia, this COVID-19 has given a lot of adverse effects. Among the most affected groups of COVID-19 at this time are those with low income, for example, those who work as farmers, construction workers, and many others. Next. The Malaysian government has taken some of the best measures to help those affected by this COVID-19 pandemic, so that they can continue their life in a situation where the whole country is facing this COVID-19 problem. Among the steps that have been taken by those responsible to help those affected or those who cannot afford when the COVID-19 pandemic hit is by distributing aid in the form of food. There are also responsible parties who help these affected in financial form. The Malaysian government has done its best to help its people affected by the spread of this very dangerous disease, which is COVID-19. That's all from us. Thank you.
COVID-19 has brought the global economy to its knees.
The pandemic has been an enormous synchronized global economic shock on a scale which has not been seen since the Second World War.
By the end of 2020, the world's GDP may be about 7.5% lower than it would have been without the pandemic. Globally, more than 15% of young people who were in work before COVID-19 have lost their jobs. Widespread lockdowns have turbocharged changes that were already affecting the world economy in technology, finance, and trade. How governments adapt to these seismic changes will determine how rapidly countries' economies can recover. In April this year, American unemployment was the highest since the Depression. Back then, around a quarter of Americans were jobless. But from the bleak depression of the 1930s was born the New Deal, an ambitious federal plan to create jobs and kickstart the economy.
40% of those seeking work have found it. We have a long way to go, but we are on the way.
The crises of the 20th century forced governments to change their policies for the better.
It's often been the case that after big periods of economic upheaval, you've had a reforging of the relationship between the individual and the state.
The Second World War was followed by an expansion of the welfare state in Europe. And high unemployment and inflation of the 1970s led to Ronald Reagan's and Margaret Thatcher's free market economics. But in the 21st century, the largest economic shocks have not led to such a change.
The global financial crisis, people thought maybe you'd have a rethinking of how banking worked, but in the end, you only got incremental reform. The effects of trade with China were not adequately anticipated by Western policymakers. They did not think about the impact it would have on some workers who were exposed to it, and I don't think that enough thinking had been done about the implications of big tech for the economy and society.
Those on the losing side of these economic shifts have felt left behind.
The result is you've got the rise of populist politicians like President Trump, the vote for Brexit, the rise of right-wing or economically nationalist populism around the world. And then among the young, you have this leftward drift, this support for politicians like Bernie Sanders, for Jeremy Corbyn.
The pandemic is the fourth economic shock of the 21st century. This time, governments could choose to respond differently. In the aftermath of the global financial crisis, many governments, especially in Europe, chose to tighten their belts rather than spend. The result was slow economic recovery.
You had governments which turned to fiscal austerity, to cutting spending to balance their budgets too soon, which also weakened the recovery and made it slower than it otherwise could have been. Now we have the pandemic, an economic downturn that's very deep, and I think it's important that governments don't repeat the mistakes of the 2010s.
So far, spending is exactly what governments have been doing. And to pay for that spending, governments have been borrowing a lot. To keep borrowing costs down, central banks in America, Britain, Japan, and the euro area have created new money worth almost $4 trillion. That money has financed household income payments, furloughed millions of workers, and bailed out businesses.
At the moment, interest rates are very low, and so despite the fact that you have this enormous debt that's been run up as a result of the pandemic, the costs of servicing it are not high. So there is no doubt that there's space for governments to support the economy.
But no one knows if or when interest rates are going to rise. And should that happen, it'll be the taxpayer forced to shoulder the burden of this vast public debt.
The balance governments have to strike is not turning to austerity too quickly, but then once, if and when interest rates start to rise, to be aware that they are very indebted and they need to ensure that their fiscal policies are sustainable.
The pandemic has brought about enormous changes. Perhaps the biggest is that for many people, the office has gone from here to here. And on the whole, they seem to prefer it. 60% of Americans who can work from home want to continue doing it at least one day a week after COVID. And in the long term, it could boost economic growth and actually decrease inequality.
One of the chief constraints on growth was the fact that it was very expensive to live near cities where jobs were increasingly congregating, especially good jobs, places like London, Paris, San Francisco, New York, Tokyo. So there is clearly an opportunity, if people do shift towards working from home, to ease that constraint.
Working remotely has been made possible thanks to a fast and widespread adoption of technology, which existed before the pandemic, but wasn't being used to its full potential.
This digital push that's now taking place as a result of the pandemic will lead to accelerated change in the economy. Ultimately, disruption is what drives long-term living standards. The important thing is that governments, I think, embrace this change rather than standing in the way and seeing it as a scary force that must be stopped.
Of course, not everyone will benefit from the remote work revolution. The urban service sector, in particular, is expected to shrink. But voters may be more likely to support disruption if the risks are shared more equally. When the world went into lockdown, millions of businesses found themselves unable to operate and with no way to pay their employees. So governments were forced to respond in an innovative way.
I think that's because there was this widespread sense that you couldn't do anything about the fact that you were unemployed as a result of the restaurant at which you worked being shut. Lockdowns were a bolt from the blue, and so the government stood behind everybody and replaced household incomes to an extraordinary degree.
In America, Congress announced a stimulus package worth $2 trillion, which included direct cash payments to almost every American. The British government rolled out a £30 billion job support scheme, and in Europe's 5 largest economies, more than 40 million workers were placed on government-funded short work schemes.
The downside to furlough schemes is that they do have this potential to keep people locked in zombie jobs which aren't coming back when the economy recovers. But the principle that household incomes in some sense can be underwritten during a large economic shock over which those households have no control is, I think, an interesting one that could be applied in future. What we've seen this year is that governments can move pretty fast to put money in the pockets of households directly, and the households will spend that money. Direct cash transfers to households do work fairly well and are not subject to quite the same level of haggling and perhaps the same degree of waste that you might get with other forms of fiscal stimulus.
While governments have sought to intervene domestically, internationally there's also been an increase in protectionism when countries shield their industries against foreign competition. The crisis has caused panic about the fragility of global supply chains.
Stalled production lines across China.
The global supply chain right now is disrupted.
A lot of firms this year paid a lot more attention to their supply chains, and it's more fashionable now to think about the robustness and resilience of those supply chains, which often means bringing them closer to the home or at least diversifying your suppliers.
There was concern in particular around personal protective equipment. Many countries blocked export of PPE and similar items. According to the IMF, there have been almost 120 new export restrictions this year.
This is coinciding with a movement towards protectionism on a global scale, with a trade war between America and China. And it's clearly a risk that coming out of the pandemic, you have leaders who are very concerned about promoting national champions, less concerned about competition rules, and really want supply chains brought home.
Despite this shift towards protectionism, there is reason to be optimistic. Government economic response to the virus has been swift and on a massive scale.
I don't think many people would have predicted that government would act that fast and that capably. They've acted much better, I would say, on the economic side than they have in terms of controlling the disease in many countries.
As with the economic shocks of the 20th century, COVID-19 presents an opportunity for a reforging of the relationship between government and the individual, in ways that many hoped would follow the previous shocks of the 21st century. The question is whether today's politics is up to the job.
Hi, I'm Henry Kerr, The Economist's economics editor. I've written a special report on the effect the pandemic is having on the world economy. You can read it by clicking the link opposite. Thanks for watching.